I'm Mike Papantonio, and this is Ring of Fire. Republicans in Washington refuse to raise taxes on their billionaire friends, so they're pushing for across-the-board budget cuts. We'll find out why austerity measures are a complete failure. And Wall Street CEOs might have escaped prison time for their crimes, but civil lawsuits are helping to make them accountable to the American public. We'll bring you the latest on efforts to make Wall Street pay. All that and more coming up, but right now, you've just entered the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
Austerity is a word that Republicans throw around so they can fool the American public. What it really means is giving billionaires more money and cutting teachers and police officers and social programs and anything else Republicans can cut away from the federal government. But austerity always fails, and I have economist and author Richard Wolff with me to talk about why it fails. Richard, austerity is the new key phrase. It's almost like we have a new hula hoop. You know, it's a new craze. We need austerity. And every time I hear that, I go back and I read Richard Wolff. And Richard Wolff explains very clearly how crazy that idea is. Let's start off by saying how crazy that idea really is.
Well, it's crazy in two ways. First, we're in the middle of an economic crisis since 2007. We have a problem of too few people with jobs, too many people losing their homes, too much insecurity of the job, lost benefits. In the middle of a crisis, the last thing on earth you want to do is have the government pull taxes out of people's pockets so they can't spend money, thereby creating jobs. And at the same time, have the government cut back spending, since it's the largest consumer in our economy. That means they buy fewer goods and services, and that means fewer jobs. In other words,
so where this
the problem worse.
Yeah, Richard, where this lands, obviously, it lands with we worsen the unemployment problem, and at the same time, we increase unemployment compensation, which ends up doing many things, but certainly it's a cycle that never gets any better, does it? And this isn't new. For example, Richard, I know you've been writing about this since I first started reading your material years and years ago. This is not a new idea. So why has this administration been so quick to buy into the idea of something that's been disproven by you and other great economists? Why is that?
Well, I think it's even worse, if I can add something. It's been proven by the history of Great Britain, of Italy, of Greece in recent years. They all followed austerity programs, and they are all deeply regretful of having done so because it's made their economic situations worse. So for me, the interesting question, why, is answered as follows. It's in some people's interests to make this the problem, the government budget, rather than the crisis underneath it, which caused the government to have a budget problem in the first place. So it benefits the people who have lent a lot of money to the government. They want to make sure that the government's able to pay them back. And so they want to see a sign of good faith from the government that it's going to pay them back and pay them all the interest on that debt. And the sign of good faith is, let's see you raise taxes on the mass of people to get the money to pay us back. And let's see you cut social programs, freeing up that money to pay us back. We want to see it, and if we don't see it, we're going to punish you at the polls, and we're going to punish you with our financial contributions.
So you have lenders, you have banks, you have insurance companies, you have all of these people who have benefited by corporate welfare. That in one breath they're saying, yeah, we want your corporate welfare, but we don't want to take care of anything else. And anytime we get the sense that we're at risk, we're going to don't care how draconian it is, don't care how crazy it is, don't care how counterintuitive it is. We want you, Mr. President, to do it anyway. Is that, sum that up?
You summed it up perfectly. And no one should miss the irony. It was the same banks, insurance companies, large corporations who got us into this mess, this crisis, with their speculations, with their bad investments, and all the rest. It was the same group that made sure that right after the crisis hit in 2008, they made sure all the bailouts went to them and to nobody else. And nobody worried then about the deficit. And now, having been the cause of the problem, having benefited from the bailouts, they turn around and instead of saying, thank you, they're saying, now we want you to stick it to the mass of people to make sure that we get paid off our share of what happened, having even benefited as much as they did. It is stunningly outrageous.
Richard, explain why, under the system of capitalism, this notion of austerity doesn't work, especially with the model that we have in place. When you talk about that, why are the two at such odds? The notion of capitalism with the model that we're using and the notion of austerity, why are those two things at such great odds?
Well, I think the problem is that we allow the basic economic decisions in our society to be made by what are now a handful of people. We really have a situation where about 1,000 large corporations do the bulk of the business in our economy. And so the boards of directors, roughly 15 to 20 people in each of those 1,000 corporations, are the real economic decision makers. They can do pretty much what they want. They want the system to serve their needs. They believe, honestly or otherwise, that letting them be free to do what they want is in the long run the best way to go. So they want the government to finesse and help them. They want the government to bail them out when they make a mistake. And they don't want to be taxed to pay for any of this because they want to be celebrated as the cause célèbre. So if we don't want austerity, we got to go to the root of the problem, which is allowing our economic well-being, all 320 million of us, to be basically in the hands of a tiny oligarchy that makes the ancient Louis of pre-revolutionary France look like puppets in comparison.
Well put. Richard, let me ask you this. One thing you write about, and it's so easy to understand, it is that there's this corporate mentality within the capitalist system that's built in, and it says, look, we want to make money and we want to save money by reducing the number of employees we have, reducing the standards of living and pay that we give those employees, and that if we do that, we're going to at least have some short-term benefits. Matter of fact, when you see unemployment rise in a stable economy, what happens? Dow Jones goes straight up. You see Dow actually climbing because they're saying, gee, this is great. We're getting rid of jobs. Unemployment is rising, and so we're going to be able to keep more profit. What's the long-term effect of that?
Well, it's been proven in capitalism so many times, it's painful to have to keep repeating it. The answer is very simple. A corporation thinks for itself, and rightly so, it's good to cut your labor costs, reduce your workers, lower their pay, cut their benefits, all of that. They don't worry about the cumulative effect, which is a flaw in our system. Obviously, if large numbers of companies lay off workers or cut their pay or cut their benefits, those workers as a whole will have less income, less money to spend, and that will hurt corporations because they won't be able to sell. So what you gain when you cut your labor cost is then offset by what you lose in the way of customers. This is a contradiction of this system that we keep running into, a little bit like a child who doesn't learn that if you touch the hot stove, it's going to hurt. And I think the reason we don't learn is because it confronts us with the fact that no little jiggling of this or that aspect of the economy is going to solve it. We've got a fundamental contradiction, a problem in the system, and that's been the no-no, the hot stove of America for 50 years, although thankfully it's now eroding, so we can finally face that we got a system that in important ways does not work.
Richard, I think an unusual thing has taken place, and that is that the president has been selling this idea that by raising payroll taxes, he somehow he's solving the debt problem. And, you know, for some reason, you have the wealthiest of our society applauding him and saying, yeah, you've solved the debt problem our way. Explain what is so absurd about this president saying what he said here.
Well, the payroll tax was the big increase in taxes. It raises much, much more money than the so-called tax on the rich. What the payroll tax did was to say to 150 million Americans who get a weekly check, we, the government, are going to hold out a significant amount of money. The tax rate was raised from 4.2% to 6.2%. That's a big increase. That means money not in the pockets to be spent of the mass of the American people, the middle class and the poor in this country. They're the ones who pay the payroll tax. So that's been the big tax increase that is going to worsen our economic performance and increase unemployment. So by comparison, the tax on the rich raises a much, much smaller amount of money because it's a very small increase from 35% to 39.6%. No rich person is not going to be rich afterwards. This is a joke.
Why does traditional media miss this? You're somebody who appears in traditional media all the time. You are a go-to guy to have questions answers. Why do they miss this? Why do they ignore this obvious problem? The president telling us one thing, reality is far from it. Why do they miss that?
Well, frankly, I don't know any way to answer that question other than to look at the mainstream media and say they really are part of all the folks who applaud these sorts of shenanigans, who want the country to believe that our central problem isn't mass unemployment, isn't a crisis-prone economic system, isn't the waste represented by unemployed people, unutilized resources, and all the output we're not getting. They want us instead to believe the government's budget, the balance, is the overwhelming problem. We have to deal with it. And then that crazy business about how we all have to make a sacrifice as the justification for what is in fact a burden on a very particular part of our society. One last point. You know, in the 1930s, we had a crisis like this one, the last big one. And because there was a CIO and movements from working people from below, we got a very different reaction. We didn't get taxes on the mass of people, not at all. And we did stick it to the rich, who paid much higher rates of taxes then than they do now. And we stuck it to the corporations, who paid much higher. And that enabled the president in the 1930s not to do what's being done now, cut, cut, cut. Roosevelt created the Social Security system. The way Roosevelt paid for those opposite of austerity programs was by taxing corporations and the rich. The tragedy of America today is not only that it doesn't do that, but that the Republicans and the Democrats and the mainstream media enable them to act as though what I just said didn't happen in our own country at a similar time.
Richard Wolff, the go-to guy when we need facts separated from fantasy. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Richard Wolff is an economist and author of the book Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. Coming up, we'll talk about how whistleblowers are helping to keep corporate America honest sometimes. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Corporate America has managed to get away with countless crimes against both the American people and the federal government. That's why whistleblowers are so important. They're the only line of defense to prevent massive corporate fraud. Joining me now to talk about the role of the whistleblower in our democracy is attorney James Kaufman. James, sometimes people don't understand how whistleblowers actually do what our government fails to do the first round. They actually uncover all types of very ugly conduct by corporate America. You worked on the Countrywide case. Tell us a little bit about how we can learn from that case.
Well, Pap, I mean, the Countrywide case was part of the absolute debacle that occurred within the mortgage industry. It was one piece of a large puzzle, but one of the whistleblowers there was a woman by the name of Eileen Foster. Ms. Foster was put in charge of compliance and looking at whether they were being compliant with their lending practices. She uncovered some horrendous activities at Countrywide. The most obvious was that in one branch out of Boston, there were these cases of whiteout, and what they would do is when a lender or a borrower didn't meet the guidelines for the lender, they would just take the whiteout and would just white out whatever the person's income was and write in the amount that they need to get them approved for the loan. And she is just one example of that. And it was interesting because if you remember, Countrywide was bought by Bank of America.
Right, right. And what they found, James, to me what's important about this story is government would have never found this. That's the first thing. Second of all, you wonder, would government have done anything at all? At this point, still, nobody's gone to jail, which is remarkable.
Absolutely.
Forgery took place. Alterations of the borrower's assets took place. Manipulation of the borrower's financials took place to make it look like they could afford the loan. They took whiteout and they actually changed the names. They actually had a template that they used to plug in and make sure that the borrower could make it through. Explain how that worked.
Yeah, well, they had a template where the borrower, if they came in with a certain income level or there were certain things that they had to meet, they would just plug whatever the information was. They would just plug in whatever information they needed to have the borrower just meet the criteria. It was it didn't matter who you were. There was a template that they followed, and that was the template that they would put on your application.
Yeah, the bigger picture to me of Countrywide is how important it is to protect whistleblowers, how important it is to have a policy and a legislative policy that protects whistleblowers, because we never would have known about this to begin with. Second of all, even with what we know, we still had a failure by the government to arrest anybody, didn't we?
That's right. And you know, Ms. Foster was, when Bank of America took over and she started exposing some of these problems, some of the forgery that was going on, Bank of America offered her $228,000 to keep quiet. And that's what these whistleblower patriots are up against, Pap, is these companies know that there's issues. They know that there's fraud occurring at Countrywide, and at Bank of America knew it at that point in time, and they offered her hush money. When she didn't take it, they tried to run her out. They tried to run her out of the company. In addition to, you know, bringing this to light, it just takes a lot of courage from someone such as Ms. Foster to bring this story, because we would have never heard it.
You know what I tell people, James, I don't know whether, of course, this is something that you do all the time. And I've often wondered, I've had people that have called in from time to time and they've asked about a case like this, and they say, I know about something, I know it's going on, I'm afraid to report what's going on. And what they miss is that they become part of a victim. They become one of the victims in the dragnet if they don't report it. Talk about that a little bit. We miss that story. Sometimes the government is always going to take the path of least resistance, especially this Department of Justice and Eric Holder's group. They're going to least resistance. They're going to try to find how is it that we can go after the low-hanging fruit. Why is it a risk not to go ahead and blow the whistle?
Well, it's a risk to not blow the whistle, because a lot of times what's going to happen is that the whistleblower who is made aware of these things, the company starts working against them. And really, there are protections within the Whistleblower Act, there are protections within the False Claims Act that protect that whistleblower against retaliation. But if you don't take the steps to bring this to light, and if you're complicit in what's going on, then you could be one of the people that if somebody else blows the whistle and does the right thing, you could be put together with all the other crooks.
And typically that's what we see, isn't it, James? We see the government, rather than going for the people at the top of the food chain, they go to the people who can't afford representation like the executive can. They don't have any protection from the top executives. They're simply hung out to dry simply because they said, well, I'm afraid to do something. And then when the dragnet comes through, you have the prosecutor who says, well, I don't want to go after the guy in the Armani suit up on the 70th floor. I want to go after the person who is easiest to get. And it's that person who may have sat there quietly. Don't you see that?
That's
time
right.
And time again?
You see that time and time again, Pap. And what you're looking at too is that when a company gets investigated, they have to show Department of Justice that they're doing something about it. So what they're doing is they're trying to find employees, and they're not going to get rid of the CEO. They're not going to get rid of their top executives. Those guys, they are too tight-knit and they are too important, so to speak, for them to get rid of. So who do they go after? They go after the middle-level person who is involved in this, that didn't report it, but is an easy person for them to make an example of and show, look at what we're doing.
Yeah, the guys at the top, there is no pain at all, because even if the government hits them for you know, a $600 million or even $1 billion fine and collects that money, the guy who made the decision at the top, it doesn't affect him. He's the one who made this happen. He's the one who gave the directive to do things like phony up documents, white out names, forge documents, manipulate numbers. He's the guy at the top that did it, and he knew about it, and he profited by it. But in the end, he doesn't worry even if the company has to pay it out, because he's made his big bonus. He has all of his benefits, and the company, the shareholders are the people who end up paying it out, don't they?
Of course, the shareholders lose, because all of these CEOs, you know, you don't have to look any further than Angelo Mazzillo over at Countrywide. This CEO made hundreds of millions of dollars, probably hundreds of millions is not an overestimate of the bonuses he received. Now, what did he pay in a fine? I mean, he was found absolutely guilty of the conduct that Ms. Foster and some other people put to light for justice. What did he pay in a fine? He paid all of $67.5 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but really when you consider how much he made at Countrywide, how much of a bonus he received year after year after year, this is just absolutely just a drop in the bucket. And the person that was paying, or the group that was paying Mr. Mazzillo every year, were the shareholders. It's Bank of America shareholders. It's Countrywide's, after they were bought from that point on. Those are the people who have to pay this out.
So we see this right now. Of course, we're seeing it more with the, we're seeing as much from Wall Street. Wall Street is an everyday occurrence. A whistleblower lately has come forward every day telling the story, let me tell you how my CEO or my executives stole from the government. And
that's
unfortunately, right, if you look at 10 times that occurs, the person that comes forward the person that comes forward is victimized completely by the company. We've seen in the armaments industry, the arms industry, where you have government contractors that are stealing America blind. I mean, the theft is staggering at this point. And we know it's staggering. We know that it's reaching, last year, the number almost reached $1 trillion that had been paid out in fraudulent money between contractors and the government over just the period of the Iraq War. And even while that's going on, the people who are coming forward, they're being victimized. I mean, we see them marginalized in their jobs. They're being told, well, we're going to move you over here to this department, and they simply disappear. They end up trying to set up charges against them for the craziest things that have no reality at all. In government has to step in, and they have to protect that whistleblower, don't they?
The government does have to protect the whistleblower, and really, it's unfortunate, but that is the corporate culture that you're talking about, is to just suppress, ostracize, and make an example out of the person that should be the whistleblower, that we should be applauding for being able to have the courage to bring forward and bring this type of fraud that, as you said, almost $1 trillion that's coming out of our government's pockets in fraudulent claims to the government, fraudulent contractors. It's not just contractors. It's those services that support our troops. It's safety of our troops. It's lives at stake here. There are so many different corners that are being cut with different government contractors, and if someone, it's not just a money thing, if someone doesn't blow the whistle on that type of fraud, we start seeing American lives being placed at risk, and we see American lives that are lost because of these contractors that are just cutting corners. And that's the worst kind.
Well, where does this go? We see these whistleblowers. You read in the newspaper, this whistleblower gets $125 million, because they do get a percentage of what they end up. But the story's never told, though, about how difficult it has been for that whistleblower to do what he or she did. You don't hear the backstories, with the company trying to ostracize them from the business, trying to have them arrested for something, trying to ruin their personal lives. You hear them getting these huge awards of $125 million, $200 million for their share in the whistleblower case, but you don't ever hear the backstory, do you?
No, you don't hear the backstory, Pap. And there's a couple of whistleblowers in the Countrywide case, for instance. There's a gentleman that was an appraiser down in Texas, and he couldn't tell his family, because one of the things when you're a whistleblower is the government's investigating. They want you to keep that secret, and they don't want you to even really tell your family about some of the things that you're going through. So this appraiser, he had lost his job. He had to tell, he couldn't tell his wife why. He couldn't say, well, I was fired because I blew the whistle on these fraudulent practices. He had to just kind of keep his mouth shut. He had to keep it secret, continue on, and the pain of having to deal with that, the pain of having to not be able to tell your family why, is such a difficult thing for a lot of these whistleblowers. But the ones that have the courage, all you hear is about the payday at the end, but really they have so much courage to bring this to an attorney like myself, to bring it to the government, to bring these kinds of frauds to light. Takes so much courage. There's so much more. It's not just the corporate culture. It's the fact that they have to keep it to themselves. They have to keep it inside, and they have to make sure that they're not talking about it, because once they start talking about it, they may blow open the government's case of what the government wants to keep secret.
James, they certainly are not overpaid for what they do for the government.
Absolutely not.
$9 billion recovered last year from whistleblowers. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Pat.
Coming up, we'll find out how civil lawsuits are helping to hold Wall Street bankers accountable for their crimes. I'm Mike Papantonio, and we'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
You're watching Free Speech TV, a network powered by the people.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. The Justice Department is full of excuses as to why they haven't put a single Wall Street insider in prison for burning down our economy and stealing trillions of dollars from the American public. But where the Justice Department has failed, the civil litigation system is working to hold these banks accountable. And I'm joined now by attorney Mike Berg to discuss what's being done in the courts to fix our banking industry. Mike Berg, Standard & Poor's, making millions as they help burn down the economy. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's important that the public know that these rating agencies, S&P, Moody's, Fitch, they're supposed to be independent. What happened here from about 2005 on was pay to play. They made hundreds of millions of dollars while they destroyed the world economy.
Well, what was happening, Mike, is that we were counting on Standard & Poor's and Moody's and all these rating agencies, first of all, to tell us the truth. And in your case that you've been involved with, I don't think there's anybody in the country that's been more involved in this than you. What you have found out, that they not only knew that they weren't playing by the game, they covered up the fact that they weren't playing by the game and not telling us the truth. did I get that right?
Absolutely. We've been working on this since late 2007. And what was going on was that they were being paid $500,000 to $1 million for rating each CDO. And the investment banks knew that what they were asking them to rate was really garbage. And they rated it commercial grade A, AA, AAA. And they knew it at the time they were rating it, but they wanted to make the money. The profits that S&P, Moody's, and Fitch made during that period of time were record profits. And it's just unbelievable what they did.
Mike, let me ask you this. So what they would do is they would take mortgages that was very clear that the mortgage was hugely risky. They would mix it in with moderate successful mortgages and successful mortgages or good, plausible mortgages. And they would disguise the whole package. That would then be put into a CDO or some type of synthetic or swap instrument. And they would be asked, would you please rate this so we can sell it? So they would rate it in a way that's favorable so the people they were working for could make more money, and they're working for the banks. Is that kind of how it laid out?
Exactly. But even beyond that, they knew, especially in late 2006, the banks knew that they were actually trying to unload the garbage into these CDOs, into these bundled mortgages. And they would go to the rating agencies and say, you need to rate this commercial grade. And if you don't, I'm going to go to one of the other rating agencies and they're going to rate it. And they're going to make that $1 million or $750,000 for rating that one CDO. And unfortunately, we all know that the rating agencies played along and they rated these things commercial grade, and then investors went in and invested in these products and lost everything.
One case I think it really tells a story that's very clear. The Western Federal Corporate Credit Union was a case where they said that the reason that they took this product, the reason that they sold this product was because Standard & Poor's had given an endorsement of the product. Well, come to find out that it was a wholesale disaster, to the tune of, matter of fact, that the credit union borrowed about $12 billion from the Treasury just to make all of this work. And in the end, it was a complete fraud. But that's one of the many, many examples of how this rating scam actually hurt all of us, hurt the entire economy.
Absolutely, and in fact, in our case, there were $100 million were lost, and worldwide, we had places like Iceland invested in these things, relying on the ratings. What's amazing, Mike, is that the rating agencies take the position that you're not supposed to rely on these. Well, that's what their job is. They do, quote, an independent rating. Here's the other thing that I think the public needs to know. From our discovery, we found out that after they would rate these things and give them these phony ratings, they then would immediately send it into surveillance to be re-rated, which is evidence that they knew the ratings that they were putting on these products were wrong and false at the time they rated them.
Mike, you actually found documents, didn't you, where you had employees of the company that were making fun of all this. They were actually laughing at how ridiculously wrong they were about the value and the safety of these products. Their own employees making a joke out of it, didn't you?
Absolutely, and we took those emails to Congress. We took them to Senator Levin's committee and Congressman Waxman's committee. Let me give you an example. They said they'd rate anything and give it commercial grade, even if it was being rated by cows. That was one example. Another was the people in the rating agency saying, I hope we're out of here and we're living on an island when this whole house of cards collapses. They knew. There also is a man at Moody's who was one of the supervisors who did a memo that said, just say no. Don't let the banks force you to do these ratings. He was basically thrown out. He was told that he was not supposed to be involved anymore, and the fraud continued.
So, Mike, what was happening here is you had Standard & Poor's that were saying, look, we had to give the banks an A or AAA or whatever the hell they wanted, because if we didn't, then we weren't going to get paid. So rather than showing character, all they showed was the same lack of character that we've seen from the financial industry and Wall Street for the last 15 years. And they just simply caved in, didn't they? And they said, pay us, and we'll tell you whatever you want to hear.
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. If you have a meat inspector supposed to make sure that we don't have mad cow in our meat, the guy goes in and all of a sudden the packing company says, oh, by the way, we're going to pay you a lot of money. Just stamp that grade A. That's what happened here. They allowed mad cow into the financial markets, and those mad cow went under $7 trillion.
I'm glad, you've been able to get the government interested enough to where they've brought a civil case here against Standard & Poor's. Actually, they need to go, Moody's, they need to go against all of these rating agencies because they were all doing the same thing. But
Absolutely.
Why aren't there criminal charges here? Why? This is just pure fraud. This is no different from a person going to a bank and making up a fabricated affidavit about their financial situation. It's fraud. It's mail fraud. It's RICO. Why is nobody being indicted for this? Why is there no grand jury being put in place to look at this?
Because the Attorney General of the United States at this point has made it clear that many of these companies are too big to prosecute. He said it last week in front of Congress. The Attorney General Holder said some of these companies are too big to prosecute. That is outrageous. These people have created a system in which they profited hundreds of millions of dollars and defrauded and almost destroyed the world economy. Criminal prosecution needs to be done, and needs to be done now.
You had former Senator Ted Kaufman from Delaware, I think, that summed it up really well. He is one of the few senators, one of the few politicians in Washington that has said, why is it that we arrest a kid on a corner who's selling 2 ounces of marijuana and we throw him in prison for 5 years, but we don't throw these people in prison when they steal trillions of dollars from the economy? Just like Kaufman said, there is no way to dress up what Standard & Poor's did here. If this pleading is correct, and this is proven to be correct, which I don't have any doubt about it, I have zero doubt about it, why are people not being indicted? Why aren't we at least seeing grand juries that are going to stop this? Do you think the civil process is going to really mean anything, Mike, even if they hit them for, $500 million? Does that mean anything to these people?
No, not at all. And let me tell you that we were involved in giving emails and documents to both, like I said, Senator Levin and Congressman Waxman's investigative committee. Do you know that the rating agencies came there and testified and refused to produce one single document and were not held to contempt of Congress? Not one document. The documents we produced were there.
In other words, they received a notice and they were told, when you come to Congress, make sure you have these documents. Right. They showed up and then they didn't have the documents, and nobody said anything. Nobody held them in contempt. Nobody took them off to jail like they would so many situations. You know, the ugly thing about this is we have a double standard. Hell, it's a triple standard here in the U.S. today. Billionaires don't get prosecuted. Wall Street gets prosecuted once in a blue moon, and everybody else gets prosecuted for whatever the hell the Justice Department decides is something that bothers them. Aaron Swartz comes to my mind. Prosecuting Aaron Swartz, prosecuting people for athletic doping, prosecuting the damnedest things that really don't have any impact on our society, but yet we let these criminals get away with anything that they want. And this is just another one of those stories. Mike, let me ask you this. When you started producing documents and you said, look, these are documents that showed that your own employees are saying that this is a fraud, it's a scam. When you started doing that, the company, Standard & Poor's responded by saying, oh, those are just cherry-picked documents. Wasn't that their defense?
It was in part, and the other one was basically, we're immune. We have a qualified immunity. You can't sue us civilly because we're just there. We're independent. Well, they're not independent. The documents prove they're not independent. Again, they're trying to hide behind the mask, saying, look, we were doing an independent evaluation, but we know they weren't. The documents were there, but they basically thumbed their nose at the entire process.
Well, so as this goes forward, Mike, what's the risk? I mean, do you really change the culture of the rating agency at all? Do you change
really
the culture at all by making them pay fines? Or is it just business as usual? Actually, the people responsible that made these decisions, they don't even have to pay the money, do they? The board has to pay the money. The stockholders have to pay the money, don't they?
Yeah, and not only that, but it's just they're asking for just a small, tiny percent of what the real losses were. These companies have to be taken to the woodshed. They need to be criminally punished. They need to have people go in there and make sure that the fines that they're going to have to pay are serious fines, or nothing's going to change.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think we have an attorney general that might be too close to this industry? If you think about it, he come from Covington Burling. They were in a law firm that defended all these folks. Isn't that kind of the problem?
Well, yeah, the problem is, number one, he's too close to him, and number two is I don't think politically they want to go and go after him, even though the world, well, again, we almost destroyed the entire world economy because of what they did.
Michael Berg, DOJ, goes after rating agencies. Let's hope they do something meaningful. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.
Mike Berg is the past president of the National Trial Lawyers Association and a regular on Ring of Fire. Coming up, we'll take a look at Fox News' plot to put their commentators in your child's classroom. It is that scary. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll be right back with more Ring of Fire.
You're witness to a political coup taking place right in front of your damn eyes. That caliber of evil needed to be held accountable in courtrooms. Billionaire mad money wasn't enough to buy democracy. Legislators don't have enough sense to think for themselves. They let Alec do it.
Here at Ring of Fire, the truth is our only agenda, so we're able to bring you the stories that mainstream media just ignored or completely got wrong.
Tune into Free Speech TV for Democracy Now!, a national, independent, award-winning news program bringing you people and perspectives rarely seen on corporate media.
Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Fox News knows that their audience is made up of gray-haired, senile, elderly, old people, so they have to find a way to stay relevant as their audience leaves this world. So now they're going after our children by airing propaganda videos by John Stossel in public schools. Joining me now to talk about the Fox News plan for our kids is author Alex Zaitchik. Alex, John Stossel in our children's classroom. I can't imagine anything scarier than that. How's all this come about?
Well, the program's actually been around for a long time. It began when Stossel was on ABC back in the late 90s. And he got a little bit of seed money from a libertarian think tank, and it's grown over the years to now what he claims is 150,000 classrooms around the country, and most of it is content from his Fox Business show.
Okay, so what is the idea of what he does in the classroom? What is it that he's supposed to project on behalf of Fox News and every neocon in the country? What can we expect?
Well, he's sort of Fox Business's in-house libertarian now that Judge Andrew Napolitano is off the air. So he's sort of the face of libertarianism for the network, and his lessons, the modules that he's promoting through this program, Stossel in the Classroom, are essentially packaged libertarian ideological lessons, and each one addresses a different aspect of government regulation, which should be abolished, is the implicit message. And together you have not just a critique of government regulation of the private sector, but you have an assault on the very idea of government legitimacy and even government's right to issue a currency, for example.
So I saw some of the topics that you talk about. One of them is, why does Hollywood hate capitalism, debunking food myths, and the real story of Thanksgiving, where he explains that pilgrims are actually hurting us by sharing with us. So I'm wondering, do teachers have a choice? Do teachers say, no, I don't want to use this. This is insane. This is crazy talk. I mean, it's not just because of Fox News. It seemed like a teacher could be a clearinghouse and say, I don't want this nut in my classroom.
Right. I mean, teachers do have to sign up for it. It is optional, but I think it's worth considering this program in the larger context of the education privatization movement, which is one of Stossel's hobby horses. And he works for a man, Rupert Murdoch, who has a large entertainment company, and it's growing, which just last week at South by Southwest announced it was going to start making these little tablets for teachers around the country called Amplify. Well, the company's called Amplify. The tablets don't have a name yet. But basically the idea is if these are distributed, they could one day hold content such as Stossel in the Classroom. I don't think it's too dystopic to imagine this at some point in our lifetimes.
It's so crazy that you want to laugh about it, but it's actually pretty scary stuff. So where we are, Fox News and the neocon right realize that they have a generational problem, that the people who ever took them seriously for any period of time are dead or dying. And so now they're moving into our classroom to try to create a new level of propaganda that children growing up can believe that Ayn Rand was really a great hero. Is that kind of where this is all headed?
John Stossel certainly admires Ayn Rand, and she's definitely someone who would occur over the course of these lessons. I think it's worth noting, though, that Stossel would certainly distance himself from the neocon label. He actually promotes a very isolationist, very radical, extreme isolationist foreign policy. Although his ideas about business and the economy are very much aligned with the mainstream right, absolutely, and the hard right.
I remember Stossel doing a segment, I guess we'll see in the classrooms, where he was talking about the value and the need for robber barons in America, how they did so much good. He actually called Jay Gould a hero. Jay Gould, you may remember, is the person that says, I have enough money to buy half of America's workforce to be willing to kill the other half. That was Jay Gould. That was the robber baron that John Stossel thinks is so important. So who is the gatekeeper on this? If you're listening to this broadcast, watching this segment, how does somebody say, is this taking place in my school? What do they do about it?
Well, I mean, you can talk to your kids and find out if there's any sort of political lessons like this going on. It's still a pretty limited program, but I think, again, to keep an eye on the education privatization movement in your state generally, because as that movement breaks down the Common Core, of curricular requirements, you're going to see more things like this start to trickle into the curriculum, because teachers aren't going to be given things they have to teach. And as their budgets are slashed to pay for these other education reform ideas and agendas, their teachers are going to become more and more reliant on outside materials that maybe can't be filtered as carefully.
In other words, it's a time filler. It's a way to say, I've got a course already filmed. It looks slick. It looks good. Real quickly, in less than 30 seconds, where does the money come from for this?
It comes from an organization in Philadelphia called the Center for Independent Thought, which is a sort of boutique libertarian funding foundation run by Howard Rich, real estate mogul, and his wife Andrea. And they distribute pretty much the entirety of the funding Stossel needs to keep this a professional operation.
And to this day, we don't know really how much Stossel's paid for this, do we?
There's $230,000 listed on their tax filings as other for this program.
Other could be just damn near anything. Anyway, Alexander, thank you for joining us. We'll stay up with the story, okay?
Thanks for having me.
Alex Zaitchik is the author of the book Common Nonsense, Glenn Beck and the Triumph of Ignorance. Cancer has become our generation's greatest medical battle. So why would anybody take a pill that's been shown to cause cancer in patients? Drug companies covered up their knowledge of the relationship between cancer and the diabetes drug Actos. I have attorney Kim Trung Lee with me now to talk about the dangers of Actos. So another medicine on the market, killing people, all different kinds of ways. It seems like every week there is another story like the one we're telling here. Tell us the Actos story.
Well, with Actos, unfortunately, you know, there's over 25 million people affected with diabetes across America. So they've got to pick drugs to help them with that chronic condition. And Actos is one of the diabetes drugs out there. Actos is manufactured by Takeda, who is the largest manufacturer in Asia and one of the top 15 drug manufacturers in the world. So essentially the problem with Actos is that it's being linked to the chronic condition of bladder cancer, which of course can kill you.
Well, they knew this going in, didn't they? They saw a relationship, the company saw a clear relationship between rats that were dying from bladder cancer in their product. And
right.
They ignored that. Is it safe to say that?
Yeah, it's safe to say it. I would say more than ignored it. I think they just, you know, blatantly pushed that evidence aside. They basically said that they couldn't tell what that relationship was between the rats and how that could affect humans. But of course, there are only studies done before the drug was approved was on rats.
Yeah, and so one reason they might want to ignore that is because they were making so damn much money. I mean, $4 billion, $5 billion, one of the biggest selling products in America. Tell us why they would ignore the fact that they have a product that they know has the potential to cause cancer in rats, and they completely ignore it. Tell us why.
Right, in 1 year alone, Takeda was making more than $4 billion on this drug. That was making up practically 25% of their revenue for just 1 year alone. So of course, it would make sense for them not to warn about this drug that was such a big seller for the company.
Don't you wonder, I think people listening to this broadcast are saying, how did the FDA let another one get by? How did it occur that now we're talking about a product that, A, we don't even need? Do you agree we don't even need this product? There are plenty of alternatives. Did I get that right?
Yeah, there are plenty of drugs out there.
So we don't need the product. It's a cash cow for this company. And so all of a sudden now we see that we're in a situation to where the FDA ignores the same information that this company ignored. It's Eli Lilly, isn't it? Aren't they one of the companies involved?
Right. So when Takeda wanted to bring this product over to America, they went ahead and joined with Eli Lilly, which is a huge manufacturer here in America, to market this to Americans. So, basically this is another situation of the FDA just dragging its heels and just taking its time to do anything to help the consumers here in America. We compare it to Europe, where France has pulled the drug completely off the market. Germany has strongly cautioned against its use. And here in America, the FDA said in 2010 that they were going to review the study reports. Then 9 months later, they said, okay, we're gonna change the label and talk about a few of the warnings and that it may be linked to bladder cancer. Took another 2 months for that to then get onto the label. But since then, it's still on the market. There's no major warning on it. There's no black box warning. There's no message out to America that says, you know what, this drug is killing people.
And so here you have a drug that if it is a 40, now tell me if this number is right because it's startling, a 40% increase of getting bladder cancer if you've been on the drug for a period of longer than 2 years. Is that the number that the FDA is allowing this product to stay on the market? Is that the number that they know?
Right. Actually, it's even worse than that. You know, when they initially put out the report in 2010 that said that the FDA was going to review the information they were reviewing said it was 2 years exposure that would cause a 40% increase, risk of bladder cancer. Since then, when they finally decided to change the label, they actually said that it was use of more than just 1 year. Now, diabetes is a chronic condition. It's going to take a while for someone to get used to that drug. It's going to take a while for the doctors to see the result. But unfortunately, by the time that happens, the patient's already at an increased risk of bladder cancer.
And again, a diabetic doesn't even need this drug. There are plenty of good alternatives besides this drug. But Eli Lilly wanted this drug because it is the cash cow that right now, what is it, about 2.3 million prescriptions in the United States of Actos for diabetics?
Right, and that was just in 1 year. That was just for about 9 months in 1 year. So that number should be larger than that.
Where do you see this going? Will the FDA do anything, or will they do what they typically do, and that is let the drug industry run wild in America, make as much money as they want, and just close their eyes to it?
You know, it's really unfortunate because I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're just going to wait and sit this out and not really, suck it to the companies like they should be. And that's why, the patients and the consumers, they need help from other avenues, from lawsuits that are going on nationwide to try to help people with this because, unfortunately, the FDA is really not doing enough.
Well, then what you're saying is what we've seen so many times. Unless you have individual advocates bringing cases against this company, the American public would never know, A, this company clearly knew the product could kill people by the way of cancer, and B, they covered it up, and C, the FDA participated in that cover-up and doesn't seem to want to do anything about it. Thanks for joining me. It's a story we'll follow.
Thank you.
Kim Trung Lee is an attorney with the Howard Nations Law Firm. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.
You're witness to a political coup taking place right in front of your damn eyes. That caliber of evil needed to be held accountable in courtrooms. Billionaire mad money wasn't enough to buy democracy. Legislators don't have enough sense to think for themselves. They let Alec do it.
Here at Ring of Fire, the truth is our only agenda, so we're able to bring you the stories that mainstream media just ignored or completely got wrong.